story happened when I was 14, but I still remember it as if it was yesterday. I started working at the library that was right next to my school. I go to school and then walk over to the library and work for maybe 3 or 4 hours. It was a part-time gig, but honestly a pretty easy job for someone my age at the time. I was responsible for putting books back on the shelves and other tedious stuff. Well, I had my cart full of books that I was placing back on the shelves when someone tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned around, and it was this man. He was really tall, like over 6'5", had nice dress pants on and a button-down shirt. He said, "Excuse me, do you have Stephen King's book, It?" I said yes, and to follow me. I guided him over to the fiction section of the library and showed him where it was. He grabbed the book, and with the most serious face he said, I love stories about children dying." That was a creepy thing to hear, especially since I was 14 and this guy was way older. I tried to play it off and told him he can check it out at the front with the head librarian. The next day, I'm back in the library, working again and putting the books back on the shelves. And I get this weird feeling that I was being watched. I turned around in the nonfiction section, and standing right behind me was that tall man from yesterday. But I swear, he was standing behind me moments before, and it startled me. He came right up to me again, even though there were other employees working, and said, "Do you carry any more books about children dying?" The way he asked me this question made me feel super uncomfortable, because he was staring at me like I was some kind of prey. And I said back to him in a frustrated way, "No, we don't. Try a different library," just to get him away from me. He looked down at me and shook his head. He said, "That's a shame. Those are my favorite kind of books." And I figured at this point he would walk away since we did not have what he was looking for. But he didn't. He bent down and put his hands on his knees and said, "Would you like to come home with me and read together?" I shook my head no, trying to hide the terror that was growing inside me. There was nothing normal about this 50-plus-year-old man asking a 14-year-old girl to hang out. He suddenly grabbed my wrists. My books fell to the floor, and he starts pulling me. He yanked me so hard, I thought my shoulder was going to dislocate. I'm pulling back with all my might when our head librarian, Gail, sees what's happening. She demands him to let me go, or she will be calling the police. The man let me go, smiled, bowed his head in some sort of apologetic manner, and walked out of the library. My mom picked me up an hour later. Gail and I told her everything that happened. She was upset and said if he was ever to come back, she would be calling the police. When we pulled up to our house, it was almost dark, and we were walking to our front door. My mom was unlocking the door when we both saw a book just off to the side of our porch. I went over and picked it up. It was It by Stephen King, the exact book that man had checked out. And I was forced to quit my job the next day. And for months, I had nightmares of that man breaking into my house and hiding in my closet with his weird smile. How he figured out where I lived is still unknown to this day. He's a sinister man who should be nowhere near any children. I'm 27 now, and I still have nightmares about him. When I was 8, my mom took me to our local library for this event that was going on. Our library was hosting this clown who would come in and read children's books to all the kids. And he wasn't a proper clown. I remember his clothes were baggy, his makeup looked half-assed, and his red nose was way too big for him. Well, there was like 50 of us kids, and we all gathered in this side room that the library had. I can't remember the clown's name, but he sat in a chair while all of us kids sat around him. While we sat there, my mom and the other parents were in the next room over where there was coffee and refreshments. The clown read us a bunch of stories by Dr. Seuss and other kids' books. He was very energetic, and would move around while he was reading the stories. When he would look up at us while he was reading, I remember him having this deep, intense stare in his eyes, as if he was actually living out the stories that he was reading. Well, the clown finished all of his stories, and we all got up to go back to our parents. The only problem was, I couldn't find my mom. I went into the next room where she said she would be, but she wasn't there. It was a little chaotic with so many kids walking around the library. Being 8 at the time, I figured that she might have just moved to a different part. I started walking away from the crowd to a quieter section of the library. I was going up and down the rows of books, looking for her, but couldn't. It was at this point where I was starting to get nervous, like I'd never be able to find my mom again. I was walking down an even more quieter part of the library when I bumped right into the clown. He puts his hands on my shoulders and asked if everything was okay. I was crying a bit and said no, I can't find my mom. He patted my head and said, "Don't worry, I know where she is. Follow me." He took me by the hand and we started walking. We were practically alone at this point. I couldn't even hear the commotion of the crowd from the reading room. We walked down more rows and he took me to this back exit door. He opened it and said my mom is over there and pointed at this beat up brown car. I looked out and was facing the back parking lot where the staff would park. But I thought to myself, that's not my mom's car. Why would she be over there? But the clown was still holding my hand and walking me towards it. He kept saying, "Don't worry, she's right over here." Just then I heard shouting. I turned my head and saw this lady screaming out the exit door that we had just come through and saying, "Hey, stop, where are you taking him?" The clown then shoved me hard to the ground. I cried out in pain. He ran over to the beat up brown car, started it, and drove off. The lady who yelled and a few others came running up to me. Their concerned looks told me everything I needed to know. To make a long story short, that clown tried to abduct me. When my mom found me, she was in hysterics. She had went to the bathroom when the reading circle had ended and couldn't find me. From what I know, I believe police were sent to the clown's address. I'm not sure if he was arrested or charged with anything though. I was only 8, but I should have known the clown was luring me into a trap. But I was so scared I couldn't find my mom that I thought he was telling the truth. I haven't been back to a library since. This happened just before the pandemic. I was in my final year of high school, and it was end of the year exams time. The library was my second home, because it's where I could actually concentrate and get my work done. I was at the library that we had in town, and it was later, like 6 p.m. There weren't too many people in there with me, and I was studying for my history final when I got a text message. I opened my phone and saw that it said, "Studying hard?" And it was from a number and an area code that I did not recognize, but whoever sent it somehow knew that I was studying at the moment. I looked up and saw only like 3 people who were also sitting at tables not too far off with their nose in a book. I figured maybe it was just one of my friends from school or just someone messing with me, and decided to ignore the text and get to studying as my final was the next morning. Not even 30 seconds go by, and I got another text. It was the same number, and it said, "Don't ignore me, Sarah. Are you studying hard?" Now I was a bit alarmed. I didn't know who this was texting me, but they knew my name, and they knew that I was studying. I stood up from the table and started really looking at the people who were in the library. But they were all older. They were people I had never seen before who were reading and minding their own business. So if it wasn't one of them sending it, then who was it? Now I was having trouble continuing my studies. I kept looking up from my books to see if anyone was maybe staring at me or looked guilty, but no one did. I did my best to focus on the text and reminded myself how important this final was tomorrow, when I heard a loud thud, and I jumped in my seat. I was sitting right next to a long row of books, and this big thick dictionary had fallen off the shelf. And I got up, picked up the book, and went to put it back on the shelf. And as I was picking it up and about to put it back in its place, there was a man's face in between the gaps, smiling at me, and he said, "Hi Sarah, are you studying hard?" When I tell you I screamed like a banshee, I am not exaggerating. Everyone who was in the library came running over to me. But when they did, I saw the man from behind the shelf sprint away. One of the librarians who worked there asked why I was screaming. I told her there was this man and the weird text that I was getting. They tried to check the library to see if they could find him, but he was gone. I tried calling and texting that number back, but it kept giving me busy signals. I looked like a crazy woman, because from the other's perspective, I was just this girl screaming her head off in a quiet library. I left right after that happened. I ended up passing all my finals with top marks, but still, to this day, I have no clue who that man was behind the bookshelves and watching me and texting me. And I have no clue how he knew what my name was or how he ever got my number. I'm a bit older now, and I refuse to ever step foot in that library again.